That baby ain't mine. The words erupted like a shotgun blast in the sterile corridor of Bronx Community Hospital. Cold, final, brutal. You really think I'd fall for this? He barked, voice rising with each word. A maid? A nobody? This is pathetic. Sylvia, 26, sat motionless on the hospital bed, arms wrapped protectively around her newborn. Her hands, though trembling, cradled the baby with fierce tenderness. Her eyes were red and swollen, but not from the birth. From everything else, she didn't answer him. Her lips pressed together so tightly they turned white. Her body curled slightly forward, sheltering the child like a mother shielding against a storm. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed, BUP Storytelling, so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now, let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. I came here to be sure, Denzel continued, pacing like a caged animal. To see this with my own eyes so you never pull this crap again, Denzel. Sylvia's voice was a whisper, hoarse from fatigue and grief. Please just look at him. I did look, he snapped. He looks like every other damn baby in this place. Ho. Sylvia shifted her grip, turning the baby slightly. A shaft of morning light from the hospital window fell across his face. That's when it happened. Denzel saw them. The eyes, that eerie, unmistakable storm-gay hue. His eyes and his father's before him, a color so rare it was practically a signature. His gaze drifted down to the baby's skin, pale, creamy, too light to ignore. His heart skipped just once. A hiccup of hesitation in a man who prided himself on absolute control. But then he blinked, shook his head, and looked away. Nah, he muttered. Coincidence. Genetics are messy. That doesn't mean a damn thing. The world went silent in that half-second. Time froze. Sylvia watched him watch the flicker of recognition, the tiny crack forming in his towering wall of denial. A soft sound escaped Sylvia's throat, half-sobbed, half-breath. She bent down and kissed her child's forehead, then held him tighter, as if the harder she held, the less it would all hurt. You planned this, Denzel snarled. You probably had someone else's baby and figured you'd pin it on me. Must have thought it was a golden ticket. His words sliced through the room like broken glass. Sylvia flinched but didn't look up. People were watching now, staff, patients, family members waiting for lab results or visiting loved ones, but none of them stepped in. None of them questioned the powerful white man in an expensive coat pointing fingers at a black woman in a hospital gown. You think just because you slept in my house that gives you the right to ruin my name? Denzel leaned in closer. You're trash. I gave you a job and this is how you repay me? You're not just a liar. You're delusional. She's just trying to trap him. I bet she did it on purpose. She should be ashamed. Whispers grew like mold on damp walls. Sylvia heard everyone. Still, she said nothing. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet tears streak down her face. Not the loud, dramatic sobs you see in movies. These were different. Quiet, heavy, tired. She didn't fight back. There was no point. The war had already happened. What remained was survival. Her mind drifted, not willingly, but as if to escape the present. She saw flashes of the past, the winter gala, the marble halls glowing under chandeliers, laughter and clinking glasses. Denzel, red-faced and drunk, called her into his office because he'd spilled bourbon. You're different, Sylvia, he slurred, leaning against the doorframe. Not like the others. You listen. She had stood frozen, unsure, her apron still on, her hands clutching the rag. He stepped closer. It's lonely, he had murmured. People only love me when I'm winning. She remembered the way he touched her cheek, the false softness in his voice, the promises whispered in that dark room. I wouldn't hurt you, he had said. You're safe here. That same night, he left her in silence. No word, no remorse. The next day, she folded his shirts like nothing had happened. And weeks later, when the test turned positive, she gathered every ounce of courage to tell him. She remembered standing in the driveway, holding the result in her hand. He barely looked at it. You're joking, he'd said, smirking. It's not mine. I haven't been with anyone else, Sylvia had replied. He rolled his eyes, pulled out his checkbook. Get rid of it, he said flatly. And don't come back. No arguments, no hesitation, just a $45,000 check and a slam door. Now here they are 7 months later. He still didn't believe her. Go ahead, he growled, yanking off his gloves. Call the press. Call a lawyer. You'll get nothing. This, he gestured toward the baby, isn't mine. You saw his eyes, Denzel, Sylvia said softly. The same grey as yours. You can lie to the world, but not to yourself. He scoffed and turned away. I see what I want to see, and I see a liar trying to scam her way into a trust fund. Then leave, Sylvia said quietly. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't break. It simply cut. If you have no heart, then go. I won't beg. Denzel paused, then walked to the door. For a moment, he looked back at her, at the baby, but he said nothing. He saw that baby's eyes again in his mind, a color that shouldn't exist twice by chance. He stepped out and the door closed behind him. Sylvia let out a sob she'd held in for hours, maybe days. She buried her face into Anthony's tiny body, rocking back and forth as if motion could stop pain. The baby stirred, then settled. She whispered through tears, You're not a mistake. You're my reason. Outside, Denzel stood beneath the hospital's awning. Snowflakes began to fall soft and slow. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out that same crumpled check, creased from months of denial. For a long moment, he stared at it. Then, with a sigh, he ripped it in half, letting the pieces fall onto the sidewalk. But inside, the storm had only just begun. 2 years earlier, the whole estate was a fortress of silence, secluded deep within the rolling hills of Fairfield County, Connecticut. The mansion stretched across 6 acres of manicured lawns, marble patios, and glass-walled rooms filled with expensive nothingness. Everything sparkled, but everything echoed. Sylvia Pratt had been working there for 3 months. She was quiet, efficient, invisible the way the job required. Each morning began before sunrise. By 5 a.m., she'd be folding monogrammed towels, wiping down untouched surfaces, prepping coffee for a man who barely acknowledged her presence. Denzel Hole didn't speak unless it was a command. Polish the floors. Don't leave fingerprints on the glass. Have the guest room ready. Sylvia had learned his rhythms. She knew how he liked his ties hung color-coded. She knew he preferred fresh strawberries with the stems cut a certain way. She also knew he never smiled. Never once. On the outside, Denzel was the American dream, a billionaire tech icon, CEO of a company that had changed the way people moved through the world. But behind the scenes, he was a machine, cold, sharp, and most dangerously bored. That winter gala changed everything. It was mid-December. The estate was flooded with people, executives, politicians, actors. The air buzzed with privilege and alcohol. Sylvia worked the event like a ghost, floating from room to room with trays of champagne and forced smiles. Later that night, after the last car had rolled down the gravel driveway, Denzel called her into his private study. Sylvia, he slurred from his leather armchair, glass in hand, shirt unbuttoned halfway. Come in, she hesitated. Do you need something cleaned? He waved the question off. Sit. Her hands tightened on the tray she held. Sir, I said. Sit. The study smelled of cigar, smoke, and whiskey. A record player hummed something low and melancholy in the corner. Outside, snow was falling gently. Quietly, Denzel took a long sip from his glass, then looked at her with a gaze she didn't recognize. It wasn't cold. It wasn't commanding. It was empty. Do you know what it's like? He said. To have everything and still feel like nothing. Sylvia didn't respond. He laughed bitterly. Of course you don't. You still believe in people in purpose. That's cute. She started to rise, but he grabbed her wrist. Not violently, not forcefully, just enough to stop her. You listen, he said, his voice dropping. You're different. You don't pretend. You don't want anything from me. You just exist. It's nice. I think I should go, Sylvia said softly. Why? He asked. Afraid I'll hurt you. No, she whispered. I'm afraid you won't remember. That line hung between them. Denzel leaned in. His breath smelled like bourbon and grief. I don't forget things that matter, he murmured. He kissed her. then sudden clumsy searching. And Sylvia, caught between fear, confusion, and loneliness, didn't pull away. Later, lying alone in the guest room she'd cleaned 100 times, Ma stared at the ceiling, her heart beating too loud. He didn't speak to her the next morning or the next. Weeks passed. Nothing changed until the 2 pink lines on the test. When she found the courage to tell him, she waited until the end of the day when the house was quiet and he was alone on the back patio. He barely looked up from his phone. "I'm pregnant," she said. He paused just a second, then returned to scrolling. "You're joking, I'm not," he laughed under his breath. The kind of laugh that says, "You're beneath me. Come on, Sylvia. You expect me to believe that?" "I haven't been with anyone else," she said. Her voice trembled, but her spine stayed straight. He stood then, towering over her, jaw tight. "You think I'm going to fall for this? You think I'll just nod and hand over a blank check? I know your type." "My type?" "Desperate, calculating. You saw an opportunity and took it." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I trusted you," she said. He pulled his wallet out and tossed a business card at her feet. "My lawyer's name is on there. You want money? Talk to him. But don't ever come back here. Denzel, you're dismissed." She left that night. No severance, no letter of recommendation, just the memory of a man who called her different and then treated her like trash. Back in the present, Sylvia sat alone in the hospital room. The baby Anthony slept peacefully in the bassinet beside her. The room smelled of antiseptic and baby powder. Outside, snow fell gently against the window pane. Her body ached, her heart more. She touched Anthony's cheek with the back of her fingers. He stirred slightly, his lips parting in a dreamlike sigh. She remembered every cruel word Denzel had said just hours earlier. But she also remembered that half-second when he saw Anthony's eyes. There was a fracture in his certainty. She saw it, felt it. He didn't believe her, but he wasn't sure anymore, and doubt was powerful. Sylvia leaned forward, pressed a kiss to her son's head. "You are not a tool," she whispered. "You are not a weapon. You are not a liar. Your truth is wrapped in soft skin and tiny fists. You are light, even if he refuses to see it. If you feel Sylvia's pain, give her a like and comment where you're watching from. Who knows? Someone nearby might be watching this story at the same time as you." She turned toward the window and watched the snow fall into silence. Outside, somewhere far from this room, Denzel Smith sat alone in the back seat of his car, staring at his reflection in the tinted glass. He couldn't stop thinking about those eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Doubt. It didn't roar. It didn't scream. It simply whispered. The storm outside had calmed, but inside Sylvia's small apartment in the Bronx, winter pressed in through thin walls and rattling windows. Anthony lay bundled in second-hand blankets, his tiny chest rising and falling with the fragile rhythm of sleep. Sylvia sat at the kitchen table with a chipped mug of tea, staring at the folded paper on the table before her. The check, $45,000, crisp when it had first been thrown at her, now creased and soft from months of being shoved into drawers, pulled out, stared at, cursed at. She had never cashed it. To do so would have meant agreeing with Denzel that Anthony was nothing but an inconvenience, a mistake to be erased. She reached for the check now, holding it between her fingers. In the dim light of the single bulb overhead, her reflection shimmered faintly in the window. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun, a strength she barely recognized in her own face. Her neighbor, Mrs. Christine, knocked lightly before letting herself in. A widow in her 60s, with a soft accent and a sharper wisdom. She often checked on Sylvia since Anthony's birth. She carried a pot of chicken soup, steam rising like a gentle promise. "You need to eat," Mrs. Christine said. She set the pot on the stove and studied Sylvia's tired expression. "What's wrong now, Sylvia?" Sylvia held up the check. "He gave me this before Anthony was born. Told me to get rid of it. Told me I was lying." Mrs. Christine's lips tightened. "Men like him think money solves everything. He came to the hospital," Sylvia whispered. Her voice cracked. He looked right at Anthony and still said he wasn't his. But for just a moment he stopped. "He saw something. I know he did." Mrs. Christine ladled soup into a bowl and set it before her. You don't need his belief to raise your boy. You need your own. Sylvia swallowed hard. She reached down to touch Anthony's tiny hand where it peeked from the blanket. I know, but how do I explain to my son when he's older why his father denied him? You explain by showing him you never did, Mrs. Christine said gently. You chose him. That's enough. The words gave Ma some comfort, but the ache in her chest lingered. She thought again of Denzel's face at the hospital. The flicker of recognition quickly buried under arrogance. That flicker haunted her. Across town, Denzel sat in his penthouse office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. The checkbook lay open on his desk. He had torn up the first check outside the hospital, but now he had written another, an even larger one. $100,000. His lawyer, Johnson, stood across from him, arms folded. You want this to go away, then make it go away. Money talks, Denzel. She's a single mother. She won't resist forever. Denzel rubbed his temple. She's stubborn. She didn't take it before. Then she's bluffing, Johnson replied smoothly. If the press finds out, we can spin it. You've always been untouchable. But if you pay her quietly, it never leaves the shadows. Denzel leaned back in his chair. For the first time, the idea of untouchable felt hollow. He had built a life on control, on bending people to his will. Yet one woman, one child, had unsettled him in a way no boardroom rival ever had. He saw those eyes again, that pale skin. He remembered his father's voice. Never let anyone see your weakness, boy. Weakness makes you pray. But was doubt weakness, or was it truth clawing to get out? He shoved the thought away. Draft the paperwork, he muttered. The next morning, Sylvia opened her door to find an envelope slid under it. Inside another check, double the first, and a typed letter. Take this money and move on. Do not contact me again. This is the final offer. Sylvia crumpled the letter in her fist. Tears burned her eyes, but behind them came anger. She wasn't surprised Denzel was predictable in his arrogance, but the insult cut deeper than before. He thought her silence could be bought. He thought Anthony could be erased like a mistake on a balance sheet. She carried the envelope downstairs and tossed it straight into the trash bin by the corner. Then she picked up Anthony and whispered fiercely, "You will not be his secret." Later that day, Sylvia returned to her part-time shift at the corner diner. The neon sign buzzed. The smell of grease clung to her uniform, and her feet ached from hours of standing. Still, she kept her head high. Anthony slept in a borrowed crib at Mrs. Christine's apartment, safe for the moment. As she wiped down a counter, two men at a booth whispered too loudly. "You hear about that billionaire's maid claiming he's the father? She's crazy. Women like that are always looking for a payout." Sylvia's stomach twisted, but she forced herself not to react. This was her life now. Judgment from strangers who knew nothing but headlines, whispers in the dark that chipped at her dignity. When her shift ended, she walked home in the falling snow. Her coat was too thin, but she pulled it tighter and kept moving. Above her, Christmas lights blinked weakly in windows. The world felt both cruel and beautiful at once. Back in his office, Denzel poured himself another drink. He told himself he had done the right thing. He told himself she was lying, manipulative, dangerous to his empire. Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw Anthony's face. Not Sylvia's face, not anyone else's, his own. Staring back at him in miniature, he drained the glass, but the image did not fade. In the Bronx, Sylvia sat by Anthony's crib, humming softly. The lullaby was one her mother had sung to her. Back when life was simpler, when dignity wasn't a daily battle, Anthony stirred, opened his eyes for a brief second. Storm-grey eyes. Sylvia smiled through her tears. He can deny you all he wants, but truth has a way of shining through. The night settled heavily around them. Two souls, one clinging to denial, one clinging to hope, both bound by a child who carried more than blood. He carried the weight of justice yet to come. And somewhere deep inside, in the cracks of his certainty, Denzel Smith carried something he could not shake. The gnawing suspicion that the life he had tried to erase was the very one that might expose who he truly was. The Bronx apartment building creaked with the weight of years. Its hallways smelled of fried onions and damp laundry, the kind of scent that clung to walls as much as memories. For Sylvia Pratt, It was a refuge and a prison all at once. Every evening after her shift at the diner, she climbed 3 flights of chipped stairs, shoulders aching, hands raw from scrubbing counters, and pushed open the door to the tiny space she now called home. Inside, the silence was broken only by the soft breathing of her son, Anthony. That night she sank into the rickety chair by his crib, her whole body heavy with exhaustion. Anthony stirred, tiny fists waving, his storm-grey eyes blinking open for a moment before fluttering shut again. Sylvia leaned closer, brushing her hand over his cheek. "You are my light," she whispered. "Even when the world tries to snuff us out." Her phone buzzes on the table. A new message. She picked it up hesitantly. The screen glared with an unknown number. The words are cold and sharp. "Cash the check. Stop the lies. This is your last warning." Sylvia's hands trembled. She deleted the message, tossed the phone aside, and pressed both palms against her eyes. Denzel's reach was long. His lawyers, his wealth, his power, they could follow her even into this broken-down building. She felt surrounded, even when alone. The next morning, she bundled Anthony into his carrier and walked him to the community clinic 3 blocks away. The January wind cut through her coat like blades, but she kept moving. Inside the clinic, the waiting room buzzed with coughs and restless children. Posters lined the walls. Free vaccinations for kids. Support for single mothers. Dr. Ivy, a black physician, in his late 52nds with kind eyes, greeted her with a nod. "Sylvia, how's our little warrior doing today?" "He's healthy," Sylvia said softly. But she hesitated, then let out the breath she'd been holding. His father came to the hospital. He looked right at him and denied him. Said I was a liar, and now he won't stop. Dr. Ivy leaned back, studying her. "Men like that fear truth more than they fear scandal. But the truth doesn't go away, Sylvia. It waits. No, I'm scared he'll hurt us. Not physically, but he has so much power. I have nothing. You have something he doesn't," Dr. Ivy said. He tapped a finger against his chest. "You have conviction. You know who your son Island is. You know what's right. Don't underestimate that." She nodded, but doubt still nodded at her. That night, after feeding Anthony and rocking him to sleep, Sylvia pulled out her journal. She had been writing letters to her son since the day she discovered she was pregnant. Tonight's entry spilled out raw and unfiltered. "Your father is powerful, but his heart is weak. He doesn't see you. Not yet. But I will fight so that one day you will never question your worth." Across the city in a glass tower overlooking the East River, Denzel Smith stood before the ceiling windows, drink in hand. The skyline glittered beneath him. He should have felt invincible as always. But something inside refused to quiet. He kept seeing that baby's face. Those eyes. His eyes. Johnson, his lawyer, sat on the leather sofa, scrolling through his tablet. "The woman's stubborn. She hasn't cashed either check. If she keeps pushing, we'll need to make her look unstable. A smear campaign. People will believe what we tell them." Denzel's jaw tightened. "And if she goes to the press, we bury her." Johnson replied smoothly. "Discredit her? A single mother from the Bronx against you? She doesn't stand a chance." Denzel didn't answer. He turned back to the window, but his reflection stared at him harder than the skyline did. He remembered his father's voice again. "Weakness will destroy you. Deny it before it denies you." But what if the weakness wasn't doubted? What if it was the denial itself? The following week, Sylvia was back at the diner, pouring coffee for truckers and night shift nurses. The air smelled of bacon grease and burnt toast. She moved quickly, balancing plates, keeping her smile polite, even as exhaustion clung to her bones. At one booth, 2 men laughed too loudly. "That's the girl," one said, nodding toward her. "The one who says the billionaire is her baby daddy figures," the other sneered. All the same story. Get knocked up, point fingers, hope for a payout. Heat burned behind Ma's eyes, but she didn't let them see. She carried their plates to the table, set them down with steady hands, and walked away. Behind her, their laughter stung like acid. Back in the kitchen, she leaned against the counter, closing her eyes for a moment. "God, give me strength," she whispered. Her manager, a wiry man with thinning hair, barked orders from across the room. Sylvia breaks over. table 7 waiting. She straightened, swallowed her pain, and went back out. Later, as snow began to fall again, she pushed Anthony's stroller down the cracked sidewalks of the Bronx. Lights flickered in apartment windows. Somewhere, a radio played an old soul song. The melody drifted around her, reminding her of her mother, long gone, but never forgotten. She stopped at the corner bodega for milk. Behind her in line, a woman whispered to another, "That's her, the liar. Poor kid." Growing up without a father, Sylvia's hands tightened on the stroller handle. She said nothing, paid for the milk, and walked out into the cold. Back in her apartment, she laid Anthony in his crib and sat beside him, tears finally spilling down her face. "They don't know you," she whispered. "They don't know me, but one day they will." She pressed her palm gently over his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "You are my truth, and truth doesn't die." Across the city, Denzel sat alone again. The second check had come back torn, slipped into his office mailbox with no note. He stared at the pieces on his desk, the inked numbers shredded. For the first time, he wondered if money really could fail him. And in the silence of his penthouse, he admitted something he would never speak aloud. He wasn't certain anymore. The doubt had grown louder, and in the Bronx, a woman who had been called a liar, a leech, and worse, rocked her son gently in the glow of a single lamp, holding fast to the belief that doubt, even in a man like Denzel Holt, was the first crack in the walls of denial, and cracks, she knew, could spread. The first Sunday of February dawned grey over the Bronx. The streets were damp from last night's sleep. Littered with newspapers that clung to the curbs like discarded confessions, Sylvia pushed Anthony's stroller slowly toward the small brick church at the corner of 147th Street. She wasn't sure why she was going there. She hadn't set foot inside a church in years. But something in her chest ached for refuge, for words stronger than the whispers of neighbors, or the taunts of strangers at the diner. Inside, the sanctuary was warm, lit by soft golden lamps and the faint glow of stained glass windows. The congregation was small, but alive elderly women in bright hats, children fidgeting in the pews, men nodding to the rhythm of the choir. Sylvia slid quietly into the back row, rocking Anthony gently as the pastor spoke. After the service, as people mingled and shared greetings, an older woman approached. She was tall, with skin like polished mahogany, and eyes that carried decades of storms weathered and survived. She wore a simple grey coat and carried herself with the kind of dignity that did not need wealth to shine. "You're Sylvia," the woman said, her voice both questioning and statement. Sylvia blinked. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," the woman replied, a small smile curving her lips. "Name's Rosa Johnson. I ran the food pantry down on 149th. I heard your story. Truth has a way of traveling. Even when people twisted, Ma stiffened, bracing for judgment. But Rosa's eyes softened as she looked down at Anthony, who cooed in his stroller. "He's got eyes like a storm rolling in," Rosa murmured. "I've seen that color before. Rare, strong, can't be hidden." Sylvia swallowed hard. She wanted to believe those words meant something, but she had learned to expect doubt, not affirmation. "People say I'm lying," she whispered. "They say I'm trying to trap him." Rosa's gaze sharpened. "Let them say what they will. The truth doesn't need their permission. The truth stands." Even when men with money tried to bury it, Sylvia lowered her head. "I don't know how to keep standing." Rosa reached out, placing a weathered hand over Sylvia's. "You stand because your boy needs you to. You stand because every woman before you who was told she was nothing refused to stay down. Don't you see? You're not just fighting for him, you're fighting for yourself." The word settled deep into Sylvia's chest, heavy yet strangely freeing. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen not as a liar, not as a scandal, but as a mother doing her best in a world designed to break her. That evening, Sylvia visited the food pantry Rosa ran. The shelves were lined with cans, the walls with photographs of families helped over the years. Rosa introduced her to volunteers, to other mothers, to neighbors who smiled at Anthony without judgment. For a moment, the weight on Sylvia's shoulders eased. "You're not alone," Rosa said firmly, as if she could read the doubt still clouding Sylvia's mind. "Remember that." Meanwhile, across town, Denzel Smith's life spun in a different orbit. He sat in a private dining room of a Manhattan steakhouse, surrounded by investors and politicians, his laughter rehearsed, his wine glass always half full. On the surface, he looked untouchable, but beneath the table, his foot tapped restlessly. He heard Rosa's words in his head, though he had never met her, only the echo of what Sylvia had whispered at the hospital. "He has your eyes." He replayed the image of the baby in his mind. Those storm-grey eyes had followed him into every boardroom, every elevator, every empty penthouse night since. At one point, an investor leaned across the table. "Denzel, you look distracted. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Denzel lied. He smiled, that perfected smile, the one that hid cracks like paint over rotting wood. But when he returned home, the mask slipped. He poured whiskey into a glass and sat alone, staring at the skyline. The city lights glittered, yet none of them eased the shadow in his chest. He had built his empire on certainty. Now, for the first time, he wasn't certain of anything. Back in the Bronx, Sylvia wrote in her journal after putting Anthony to sleep. She wrote about Rosa's words, about the strength she hadn't known she carried, about the fire that was starting to burn again inside her. "You are not a mistake," she wrote to Anthony. "You are not ashamed. You are my truth. And one day, your father will see it too, whether he wants to or not." Days turned into weeks. Sylvia worked double shifts, her body aching, but her spirit steadier. Rosa checked in often, bringing meals, reminding her to rest, reminding her that dignity was not something a billionaire could erase. One evening, as Sylvia walked home, a group of teenagers on the corner sneered. "There's the liar," one muttered. "Baby mama of the rich man," another laughed. "Bet she's just after his wallet." Sylvia's steps faltered, but she didn't stop. She kept walking, her head high, Rosa's words echoing. The truth doesn't need their permission. At home, she held Anthony close, pressing her cheek against his soft hair. One day, she whispered, "You'll know how hard I fought to protect you. You'll know the truth no matter what anyone says." And though her body trembled with weariness, her heart beat steady with resolve. Across the river, Denzel stood again in front of his mirror. He stared at his own eyes, storm-grey and unyielding. Then he saw Anthony's face flash across his mind like a ghost, carrying the same gaze. He poured another drink, but this time it didn't wash the vision away. And as the city settled into night, two lives moved in parallel, one clinging to power, the other clinging to hope, both bound by a child whose existence would soon force their worlds to collide again. The March wind cut sharp across the Bronx, carrying with it the metallic scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Inside the small apartment, Sylvia sat in the rocking chair that Mrs. Christine had rescued from a thrift store and insisted she keep. Anthony lay nestled against her chest, warm and steady, his soft breath rising and falling in a rhythm that made the world feel bearable. Sylvia hummed a tune her mother used to sing, though her own voice cracked from exhaustion. She closed her eyes and let the melody carry her back to the moment she first held him back, to the silence of the delivery room when the nurses had stepped aside, and she had heard only his cry, sharp and strong, breaking the air like lightning through storm clouds. She remembered the way the doctor had placed him in her arms. He was tiny, impossibly fragile. Yet in that instant, she had felt an anchor drop inside her soul. Nothing could sever the bond. She had whispered into his ear, "You are not a mistake. You are my miracle." Her tears had fallen onto his cheeks, but he had not cried. He had stared up at her, his grey eyes wide, already carrying more truth than any man dared admit. Now, weeks later, she studied those same eyes as they blinked open and caught the faint glow of the lamp. She thought of Denzel, how he had looked at Anthony and faltered, how denial had surged back to the surface like a reflex. That flicker of doubt in him had been real. She clung to it, even though she hated herself for needing any piece of him at all. The knock at the door startled her. Sylvia rose carefully, laying Anthony in his crib, and opened the door to find Rosa standing there with a basket. "Thought you might need these," Rosa said, stepping inside. "Diapers, formula, a couple cans of soup. Donations from the pantry." Sylvia blinked back tears. "You've already done so much for me." "Oh, and I'll keep doing it," Rosa replied firmly. "Community doesn't end when the church service does. You understand?" Sylvia nodded. She wanted to believe it, to accept kindness without guilt, but the pride that lived in her chest made the acceptance heavy. As Rosa held Anthony, cooing at him, Sylvia confessed quietly. Sometimes I still hear his words in my head, the way he called me a liar, the way everyone whispers behind my back. Rosa looked up, her gaze sharp. Let them whisper. Their words don't raise this boy. You do. Their words don't decide his future. You will? Sylvia felt her throat tighten. She wished her mother were alive to say those things, to remind her she was more than the insults, more than the shame cast on her by the rich man who had used her and walked away. But maybe, just maybe, Rosa was filling that space now. That night, after Rosa left, Sylvia sat with her journal. The pages were filled with letters to Anthony, each one a piece of her heart inked onto paper. Tonight, her pen moved slower, heavier. You were born in silence, but the truth was loud inside me. Your father looked at you and denied you, but one day he will not be able to deny what God has written in your eyes. You are my strength when I have none. You are proof that even in betrayal, life can bloom. She closed the journal and kissed the sleeping boy's forehead. One day, she whispered, he'll see you the way I do, even if it breaks him. Across the river, Denzel sat in his penthouse alone with a glass of whiskey. The city lights blinked below, but he couldn't focus on them. His lawyer's words echoed in his ears. Discredit her. End this now before it spreads. But another voice rose, softer, yet more insistent, the voice of doubt. The image of the baby haunted him, grey eyes cutting through the armor of arrogance he wore like a second skin. He slammed the glass down on the counter, shattering it. The whiskey spread like a stain across the marble. For a long time he stared at it, breathing hard, then whispered into the empty room, "Why can't I stop seeing him?" He thought of his own father, a stern man who had never let him show weakness, who had once told him after a mistake, "You will never be allowed to be ordinary. Don't forget it." That demand had forged Denzel into the ruthless man he was, but now he wondered if it had also hollowed him out. He rose, grabbed his coat, and paced the penthouse floor, as if walking could silence the questions. But no matter how far he walked, the storm-grey eyes followed him. Meanwhile, Sylvia faced storms of her own. The gossip in the diner grew sharper each week. Customers whispered within earshot. A fellow waitress muttered, "She's only here until she gets his money." Even some neighbors in the building looked at her differently, as if Anthony's very existence was a scandal. One evening, leaving work with her coat buttoned tight against the cold, Sylvia overheard two men laughing outside. "Have you heard about Smith's maid? Claims her baby's his. Guys like him. He wouldn't touch someone like her. She's desperate." The words struck, but Sylvia kept walking, clutching the stroller handle tighter as Anthony slept beneath his blanket. She had learned not to fight with words. Her fight was survival. Her weapon, the unshakable love she carried for her son. Back home, she looked at Anthony, tiny chest rising and falling, and whispered, "The world may deny you. He may deny you, but I never will." That night, as the city hummed with distant sirens and muffled arguments, Sylvia knew she had reached a turning point. She could no longer hope Denzel would change on his own. If justice was ever going to come, she would have to be the one to bring it into the light. She kissed Anthony's forehead again and said, "You were born in silence, but I promise, my son, your truth will not stay silent forever." And as Denzel poured himself another drink across town, staring into the city lights and fighting the storm inside him, the first seeds of that truth were already beginning to take root. Spring in the Bronx brought no blossoms of ease for Sylvia. The streets were still bruised from winter. Grey slush clinging to the curbs, the scent of exhaust heavy in the air. Yet inside her small apartment, life pulsed warm and steady. Anthony had learned to smile, a crooked little grin that stretched wide whenever Sylvia leaned over his crib. His laugh, light and sudden, was the kind of sound that stitched cracks in her weary heart. One Saturday morning, sunlight broke through the dusty window as Sylvia dressed Anthony in a clean onesie. She lifted him up and kissed his cheek, savoring the simple joy. Just then, Mrs. Christine knocked on the door and stepped inside, carrying a bag of groceries from the bodega. "Look at you, big boy," the older woman cooped, reaching for Anthony. You're growing so fast. Sylvia smiled, grateful for the support. While Mrs. Christine held Anthony, she pulled out her phone. The sight of them together made her pause. On instinct, she lifted the phone and snapped a photo. Anthony's storm-grey eyes sparkled in the morning light. His small fist curled tight against his grandmotherly neighbor's shoulder. She didn't plan to share it, but when Rosa called later to check in, Sylvia sent her the picture with a short message. "He's doing well today. Thank you for everything." Rosa, proud, showed the photo to one of the pantry volunteers, who in turn posted it on a small community page online. Within hours, the image began to spread, shared among neighbors, friends, and eventually strangers. No one knew the child's last name, but the comments poured in. "Beautiful boy. Look at those eyes. He's special." The next morning, Denzel scrolled absently through his phone while his driver fired him at a meeting. His thumb stopped mid-wipe. There, buried in a trending thread, was the photograph. Anthony, smiling in the sunlight, his eyes like shards of stormy glass. Denzel's chest tightened. The resemblance was unmistakable. He had seen those eyes staring back at him in the mirror his entire life. He zoomed in, staring until the edges of the screen blurred. "Sir?" the driver asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Everything all right?" Denzel shoved the phone into his pocket. "Just drive." But nothing felt all right. That evening, instead of celebrating another successful deal with investors, Denzel found himself pouring a drink in silence, staring again at the photograph. Doubt wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a shout that refused to be silenced. He remembered his father, stern and unyielding, demanding perfection. Weakness makes you pray. The memory tangled with the sight of the boy's face, his son's face. Denzel slammed the glass down. He couldn't ignore this. Not anymore. Meanwhile, Sylvia returned home from her shift at the diner. Unaware of the storm she had unintentionally unleashed, she fed Anthony, rocked him, and whispered stories about the future, about schools, playgrounds, summers filled with laughter. She dreamed aloud, even as fatigue pulled at her bones. Her phone buzzed with messages. Friends she hadn't heard from in years reached out. "Is this your baby? He's beautiful." Some congratulated her. Others cried with curiosity. A few comments carried venom, trying to get attention. "You know, everyone's talking about you, right?" Sylvia ignored them all. She focused on Anthony's steady breathing, the way his small fingers wrapped around hers with trust. But Denzel did not ignore the photo. The next day, he appeared unannounced at the clinic where Sylvia sometimes volunteered with Rosa, hoping to give back in small ways. She was in the supply room when she heard the commotion outside. Hushed voices, the sound of someone insisting when she stepped out. Her heart stopped. Denzel stood in the waiting area, flanked by 2 security aides. His eyes swept the room cold and searching. "Sylvia," he said, his voice low, heavy with command. The room went silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward them. Rosa stepped forward, protective, but Sylvia raised a hand to stop her. "What are you doing here?" Sylvia asked. Denzel's gaze flicked toward the stroller beside her, where Anthony sat awake, wide-eyed and curious. Their eyes met the father and the son, and Denzel faltered for just a second. He quickly masked it. "I saw the photo. You need to stop putting him online." "I didn't put him anywhere," Sylvia snapped. "But why does it matter to you if he isn't yours?" The question hung heavy. Denzel's jaw clenched. He looked around, aware of the audience. "Because lies spread fast. You're trying to destroy me." Sylvia stepped closer, her voice firm but shaking with rage. "Destroy you? You did that yourself. You walked away. You denied him." Denzel's aides shifted, but he lifted a hand to silence them. His eyes were locked on Anthony, who stared back with storm-grey certainty. The silence stretched until it hurt. Finally, Denzel muttered, "This isn't over." He turned and left, the echo of his footsteps sharp against the clinic floor. Rosa came to Sylvia's side, her hand steady on her shoulder. "Child, you rattled him. Did you see it?" He looked at that boy and couldn't hide it. Sylvia exhaled, trembling, but he still left. "He left with doubt in his pocket," Rosa said. "And doubt, when planted in stone, can crack it wide open." That night, Sylvia lay awake, listening to Anthony breathing. She replayed every second of the confrontation, the way Denzel had looked at him. The pause, the hesitation, she clung to it even as fear coiled tighter around her chest. Across the city in his penthouse, Denzel sat in darkness, staring at the same photograph on his phone. He zoomed in again and again, studying the boy's face until the lines blurred into his own. He tried to drown the truth in whiskey, but the storm in the child's eyes would not leave him. For the first time in years, Denzel Smith didn't feel powerful. He felt hunted not by scandal, but by truth. And somewhere deep inside he knew. No amount of money, denial, or distance would keep it from finding him. The night after the clinic confrontation, Denzel lay awake in his penthouse, staring at the ceiling. The city sprawled beneath him, a blanket of lights and noise. Yet he felt utterly alone. He poured another glass of whiskey, but left it untouched on the nightstand. No drink could silence the image burned into his mind. Anthony's storm grey eyes, his own eyes, his father's eyes. He rose from bed and walked barefoot across the cold marble floor into his private study. On the wall hung an old black and white photograph of his father, taken decades earlier. A stern man in a tailored suit, eyes sharp, mouth unforgiving. The resemblance between those eyes and Anthony was undeniable. "Damn it," Denzel muttered, tearing his gaze away. He splashed water on his face in the adjoining bathroom, gripping the counter until his knuckles widened. In the mirror, he saw not himself, but echoes the boy who had grown up under those unforgiving eyes. The boy told never to falter, never to show weakness. And now a child born of a mistake threatening to unravel everything he had built. The next morning, Johnson, his lawyer, arrived at the penthouse. "We need to control the narrative," Johnson said briskly, dropping a folder on the desk. "If this continues, rumors will multiply. I recommend a smear campaign against her. Question her credibility. Paint her as unstable." Denzel frowned, flipping through the documents, articles drafted, background checks, even photographs from Sylvia's diner job. "You want me to ruin her?" Johnson shrugged. "Better her than you. This is about protecting your legacy." Denzel stared at him, jaw tight. Legacy, the word echoed hollowly. He had spent decades building an empire, crushing rivals, commanding headlines, but when he closed his eyes, all he saw was a baby's gaze. Honest, unyielding, his blood staring back at him. "Not yet," Denzel said, finally, pushing the folder back. "Give me time." Johnson looked surprised. "Time for what?" Denzel didn't answer. Meanwhile, in the Bronx, Sylvia sat at the small kitchen table, writing another letter in her journal. Anthony napped in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling. She wrote fiercely, the words spilling as though they had been waiting at the edge of her pen. "Your father looked at you yesterday. He tried to hide it, but I saw the doubt. I saw the truth creeping in. One day, he won't be able to walk away." Later, she tucked the journal back under the mattress and bundled Anthony for a walk. The streets hummed with life vendors calling out, buses hissing at stops, children chasing each other down cracked sidewalks. Neighbors still whispered, but Sylvia had learned to keep her chin lifted. She had Rosa's voice in her mind. The truth doesn't need permission. At the church pantry that afternoon, Rosa noticed the determination in Ma's face. "Something changed," she observed. He looked at Anthony. Sylvia replied softly. "He couldn't deny him completely. I know he'll fight it, but I saw it. He knows." Rosa nodded slowly. "Doubt in a man like him is dangerous. But it's also a crack in the armor. Don't let him scare you into silence." That evening, Denzel returned from a meeting and found himself pacing his office instead of reviewing quarterly reports. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old family album, something he hadn't touched in years. Leafing through the pages, he stopped at a photograph of himself at age 2. Same grey eyes, same pale skin. The resemblance to Anthony was chilling. He slammed the album shut and shoved it back into the drawer, yet the image lingered, chasing him down the corridors of memory. He recalled the night of the gala, the bourbon on his tongue, the loneliness gnawing at him. He remembered calling Sylvia different, confessing emptiness he never admitted to anyone else. He had used her, yes, but he had also revealed more of himself than he ever intended. That contradiction unsettled him more than the possibility of fatherhood. For the first time in years, Denzel Holt felt haunted not by scandal or rivals, but by a truth he couldn't escape. 2 nights later, he drove himself to the Bronx, alone, without his aide or security detail. The car rolled slowly past the row of crumbling buildings, past the flickering street lamps and graffiti-stained walls. He parked across from Sylvia's apartment building and sat in silence, watching the windows glow faintly with life. He imagined Anthony inside, being rocked to sleep by lullabies Denzel had never known. Held with a tenderness Denzel had never received from his own father. He gripped the steering wheel, torn between impulse and fear. Part of him wanted to knock on her door, to see his son again, to face what he had denied. But another part, the louder part, snarled at him to leave before weakness consumed him. In the end, he drove away, tires hissing over wet pavement. But as he merged back onto the highway, he realized he wasn't leaving the truth behind. He was carrying it with him, lodged like a stone in his chest. Back upstairs in her apartment, Sylvia sensed nothing of the car that had idled on her street. She sat by the crib, stroking Anthony's hair, whispering promises into the quiet. "You'll never feel unwanted," she said. "Not as long as I'm here." Anthony stirred, his storm-grey eyes opening briefly. They locked on hers, clear and steady, as if he understood. Sylvia smiled through her exhaustion. "The world may deny you, he may deny you, but I never will, and one day the truth will be too loud for him to ignore." Across the city, Denzel stood again before his mirror, staring into his own eyes. For the first time, he admitted something, if only in silence. He was afraid. Afraid of losing control, afraid of facing himself, afraid of what his son's existence revealed about the man he had become. The whiskey sat untouched. The city lights blurred, and in the reflection staring back at him, he saw not power, not legacy, but the ghost of a boy he could no longer deny. The following week, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, but for Denzel Holt, everything felt offbeat. He sat in the glass conference room of his company headquarters, surrounded by board members, analysts, and lawyers. They discussed expansion projects and stock performance. Yet his mind drifted. The polished charts and projected profits blurred, replaced by the memory of a boy's grey eyes staring straight through him. Denzel, one of the board members, prompted, "Your thoughts on the Brazil deal?" He cleared his throat, straightened his tie. "Move forward," he muttered. Though the words carried no conviction, his reputation as a visionary, decisive, and ruthless was cracking. People around the table exchanged subtle glances, but no one dared question him aloud. Later, in the solitude of his penthouse, he poured himself a drink and didn't touch it. Instead, he walked to the balcony, the city buzzing beneath him like a restless hive. He leaned against the rail and whispered into the night, "What am I doing?" The question was not for shareholders or lawyers, but for himself, and it had no answer. Meanwhile, in the Bronx, Sylvia noticed the change too. Though from her side of the glass, it looked like shadows lengthening. She heard whispers that Denzel had been distracted at meetings, that his sharpness was dulled. She couldn't confirm the rumors, but she felt in her bones that the truth was beginning to wear him down. At the diner one evening, a woman in a business suit approached her. "You're Sylvia, aren't you?" the stranger asked. Sylvia tensed. "Who's asking?" The woman slid a card across the counter. "Journalists. People are talking about Holt. If you're ready to tell your story, I'll listen." Sylvia froze. Her heart raced. For months, she had dreamed of shouting her truth, but fear had always tethered her. She looked down at Anthony's photo taped inside her order pad. He smiled back at her with storm-grey certainty. "Not yet," Sylvia whispered, pushing the card back. "But maybe soon." That night, she told Rosa about the encounter. The older woman listened with patience, her wise eyes steady. "The truth has legs, child. It walks with or without you. The question is, will you guide it or let others twist it?" Sylvia sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing on her. Across town, Denzel sat in his private gym, pounding fists into a leather bag until his knuckles burned. His trainer had left hours ago, but he kept swinging, sweat dripping into his eyes, muscles screaming. Each punch carried rage. He couldn't name rage at Sylvia, at himself, at the mirror that showed him a man unraveling. Finally, he collapsed onto the bench, chest heaving. He saw again the photograph that had spread online, the storm-grey eyes unblinking. He muttered, "You're not mine." But the words lacked power. He thought of calling Johnson, of unleashing the smear campaign, of silencing Sylvia once and for all, but he hesitated. Every tactic felt like building a wall around a truth that would eventually seep through the cracks. Days later, Sylvia walked Anthony to the park. The early spring air carried a hint of warmth. Children chasing soccer balls across muddy grass. She sat on a worn bench, watching Anthony clutch at her necklace with tiny fingers. She whispered promises to him, promises of schools, stories, a future free of shame. From across the park, a man in a dark coat watched Denzel. He had come without security, standing half hidden near a lamp post. He hadn't planned it, but he couldn't stay away. His chest ached as he saw the boy laugh, the same crooked grin Denzel himself had worn as a child. Sylvia noticed him after a moment. Their eyes locked. For a long beat, the world seemed to hush. She didn't rise, didn't shout. She simply held Anthony tighter, daring him to look away again. Denzel's throat tightened. He turned, disappearing into the city before she could call his name. But as he walked, he knew he hadn't escaped. He had seen too much that night. Sylvia wrote another journal entry. He was there. He watched you laugh, Anthony. He didn't speak, but he saw he could run from us, but not from what's in his blood. One day he'll have to face it. And in his penthouse, Denzel stared into the mirror again, fists clenched. For the first time in his life, the fortress of denial he had built so carefully no longer felt indestructible. The cracks were spreading, and through them, truth shone like a light he could no longer blind himself to. He whispered, almost against his will, "My son." The words lingered in the empty room, fragile yet undeniable. A confession he wasn't ready for anyone to hear, but one he could no longer silence within himself. Rain drummed against the glass walls of Denzel Smith's penthouse, streaking the skyline and blurred rivers of grey. He sat at the edge of his leather sofa, elbows on his knees, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey on the table. The city below thrummed with its usual chaos horns, sirens, the restless beat of ambition. But inside the penthouse, silence pressed heavily. He whispered the words he had dared speak only once in private. "My son." The sound startled him as though someone else had spoken. He rubbed his face with both hands, pacing the room like a man cornered. For years he had lived untouchable, his power shielded by money and reputation. But now a child's eyes had pierced through, cracking open the armor he had forged since boyhood. Johnson's voice from their last meeting replayed in his head. Discredit her. End this before it spreads. That was the logical path, the path his father would have demanded. Control the story, bury the woman, erase the problem. Yet, every time Denzel pictured signing off on that plan, he saw Anthony's smile crooked, innocent, undeniable. Across the Bronx, Sylvia listened to the storm from her small apartment. Anthony slept soundly in his crib. Lulled by the rain's rhythm, she sat at the table, Rosa's words echoing. The truth doesn't need permission. On the counter sat the journalist's card she had refused weeks earlier. She traced its edges with trembling fingers. Her fear worked with her fury. She had survived shame, gossip, exhaustion. But what if Denzel moved to destroy her completely? He had the money, the connections, the media clout, one false headline, and she could lose everything. Her job, her dignity, maybe even her son's future. Yet another voice pushed against the fear. If you stay silent, he wins. The next Sunday, Sylvia met Rosa at the church pantry. The older woman noticed the card in her hand. Still wrestling with it? Sylvia nodded. If I speak, he'll come after me. If I stay quiet, I'm complicit in his denial. I don't know what's right anymore. Rosa squeezed her shoulder. Right and easy rarely walk together. You already know the truth. The question is, do you have the courage to let others see it? That night, Sylvia drafted an email to the journalist. Her finger hovered over send. She looked at Anthony, stirring softly in his crib, and pressed it. Meanwhile, Denzel sat in his office overlooking the East River. Documents spread before him. He tried to drown himself in numbers and contracts, but his phone buzzed. A notification. An online article. His heart dropped as he read the headline. Single mother claims billionaire Denzel Holt fathered her child. The photograph of Anthony filled the screen. Those storm-grey eyes. That unmistakable grin. The article detailed Sylvia's background, her work as a maid in his estate. The night she said everything changed, Denzel's pulse pounded. Rage surged, but underneath it, fear. The story is out now. No smear campaign could erase what people had already seen. Within hours, his office phone rang non-stop. Board members demanded answers. Investors threatened to pull out. His lawyer barked about defamation suits. But all Denzel could see was the boy's face plastered across every news feed. He left the building without speaking to anyone, ignoring the rain that soaked his tailored suit. He drove aimlessly until he found himself outside Sylvia's apartment building again. The neon sign of the corner bodega flickered across the wet pavement. He didn't go in. He sat in the car, staring at the glowing windows, his chest tight. For the first time in decades, Denzel Holt, master of every room, felt powerless. Inside, Sylvia held Anthony close as her phone buzzed endlessly. Some messages were supportive. You're brave. We believe you. Others cut like knives. Gold digger. Liar. She turned the phone face down and kissed her son's head. They don't matter, she whispered. What matters is you. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, cameras swarmed outside Denzel's corporate headquarters. Reporters shouted questions as he strode past, face stone hard. Mr. Holt, is it true? Is Anthony your son? Did you pay off the mother to keep quiet? Why deny him? He said nothing. Silence was his shield. But silence was also admission. Every flash of a camera felt like another crack in his fortress. Back in the Bronx, Sylvia faced her own storm. Neighbors gossiped louder. Customers at the diner whispered openly now. But she held her head higher than before. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was fighting. Rosa visited that evening, bringing soup and steady wisdom. You lit a fire, child. Fire spread fast. Be ready. Sylvia nodded. Exhaustion etched in her face, but her eyes steady. I'm not afraid anymore. He saw Anthony. The world will see him too. That's enough. Across town, Denzel stood once more before his mirror. His reflection looked back, not as the billionaire titan, but as a man cornered by his own lies. Behind his eyes flickered the truth he could no longer outrun. My son, he whispered again, the words heavier now, carrying both fear and inevitability. And as the city buzzed with scandal, two worlds moved closer to collision. One built on denial, the other on unyielding love. The storm was no longer coming. It was here, and neither Denzel nor Sylvia could escape its weight. The scandal hit harder than Denzel Holt expected. By midweek, his name trended across every platform, the photograph of Anthony's eyes becoming an emblem of whispered truth. The media swarmed. Reporters camped outside his office, outside his penthouse, even following him to his private gym. Headlines blared. Billionaire denies child with former maid. Storm. Grey eyes raise questions. The fall of an untouchable titan. Inside the penthouse, the walls felt closer than ever. Denzel slammed the television remote against the coffee table, shattering the casing. The screen froze on an image of Sylvia, carrying Anthony through the rain. Her chin high, her eyes defiant despite exhaustion. Something in that image pierced him deeper than the articles. She looked stronger than he remembered. No longer the maid who lowered her eyes when he barked orders. She looked unbreakable. Johnson arrived with a folder under his arm, his tone sharp. We can still control this. File a defamation lawsuit. Demand a DNA test on your terms. Discredit her through the press. If we push hard enough, she'll fold. Denzel rubbed his temple. And if the test proves what I already know, Johnson hesitated, then we bury the result. With enough money, truth bends. Denzel's eyes hardened. Truth doesn't bend. Not this one. Johnson frowned. You're letting sentiment cloud judgment. Think of your empire, your investors. My empire is crumbling anyway. Denzel snapped, cutting him off. Maybe it's time I stopped pretending I can control everything. For a moment, Johnson looked at him, as though he didn't recognize the man before him. Then he gathered his folder and left, muttering, Weakness never ends well. Czar. That night, Denzel sat in the dark study with the old photograph of his father on the wall. The man's cold eyes stared down, demanding strength, demanding denial. For the first time, Denzel whispered back, "You were wrong." In the Bronx, Sylvia faced her own siege. Paparazzi lurked outside the diner. Strangers shouted questions when she pushed Anthony's stroller down the street. Some offered sympathy, but others hurled cruel words. "Liar!" one man shouted. "Gold digger!" Another spat. Each insult cut, but Sylvia kept walking, shoulders squared. Inside, though, fear twisted her gut. She worried not for herself, but for Anthony, what scars these years might leave on him, what shadows he might carry because of his father's denial. One evening, Rosa visited with groceries and a steady presence. Sylvia admitted, "I don't know how much more I can take. Every day feels like a battle." Rosa touched her arm. "Child, battles are fought for what matters most, and what matters is right there in that crib. Don't let the noise make you forget." Sylvia looked at Anthony, sleeping peacefully, his tiny fists curled. She nodded, tears blurring her vision. "You're right. I'll fight for him until I have nothing left." 2 days later, the battle shifted. A subpoena arrived at Sylvia's door. Denzel had filed for a court-ordered DNA test. She held the papers in trembling hands, rage and relief mingling. On one hand, it was another attempt to control her. On the other, it was a path to undeniable truth. She called Rosa immediately. "He's forcing a test." "Then let him," Rosa replied calmly. "Truth? Don't fear light." Sylvia pressed the papers to her chest, whispering to Anthony, "This is it, my love. They'll all see." Across the city, Denzel prepared for the same test, his mind a storm in his heart. He already knew the answer. But fear not at him. Fear not of fatherhood, but of the man he had been. To admit Anthony was his son meant confronting the lies he had built his life upon. It meant facing the night he used Sylvia and walked away. On the day of the appointment, Sylvia arrived at the clinic first, Anthony in her arms. She wore her plainest coat, her hair pulled back, determined not to give the cameras waiting outside any glamour to twist. Reporters shouted questions, flashbulbs blinding her as she hurried inside. Minutes later, Denzel arrived through a separate entrance, flanked by aides. He looked tired, older than his years, the weight of scandal pressing down. When he entered the waiting room, silence fell. His gaze locked on Sylvia across the room. For a long moment, neither spoke. Anthony stirred in Sylvia's arms, blinking awake. His storm-grey eyes met Denzel's, and the air grew thick. Denzel's throat tightened. Every excuse, every denial, every cruel word he had hurled at Sylvia crumbled in that instant. The nurse called them in. The test was quick, clinical. A swab inside Anthony's cheek, another from Denzel, but the weight of it felt monumental. Each sample sealed was another brick in the wall closing around the truth. Afterward, as they stood outside the clinic under a cloudy sky, reporters swarmed. "Mr. Smith, do you admit he's your son?" "Sylvia, what do you hope to gain from this?" Denzel said nothing, but he didn't walk away immediately. He glanced at Anthony once more. His eyes softened before he turned and entered his car. The flicker of humanity didn't escape the cameras. By evening, the photograph of Denzel looking at Anthony, vulnerable for the first time, flooded the internet. In the Bronx that night, Sylvia held her son close and whispered, "It's only a matter of time now. Truth is louder than lies." And in his penthouse, Denzel poured out his untouched whiskey, staring at the skyline. For the first time, he wasn't drowning his doubt. He was bracing himself for the tidal wave of truth he knew was coming. The results would arrive in days, but the verdict was already written in the storm-grey eyes of a child. The morning the envelope arrived, the Bronx air was heavy with spring rain. Sylvia heard the thud of mail slipping through the slot and froze where she stood in the kitchen. Spoon paused over Anthony's cereal bowl. For weeks, her life had been a storm of reporters, whispers, and waiting. Now the storm had delivered its answer. She walked slowly to the door. Heart pounding, the envelope bore the clinic seal. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Words swam on the page, but one line cut through everything. Probability of paternity. 99.99%, her breath caught. She pressed the paper to her chest, tears spilling freely. "It's over," she whispered, looking toward Anthony, who banged his little spoon against the high chair tray. "They can't deny you anymore." She lifted him, kissing his cheek as her tears wet his soft skin. "The truth is yours now." By noon, the results had leaked. News anchors interrupted programming. Headlines flashed with recognition and social media erupted toward him. DNA test confirms billionaire Denzel Holt is fathering the boy into his arms. The photo of Anthony's storm grey eyes ran alongside every report. Anthony pressed his tiny hand against his father's face when Johnson burst in, as if mapping the features he instinctively knew were his own. "It's everywhere. We'll need to do damage control." The kitchen. Immediately statements, interviews, softened at the sight. Denzel held up a hand. Actions, his face was not words, drawn. Over breakfast, his voice, the silence between them was heavy. "Stop." Denzel broke at first. "Stop. I don't expect you have any idea what this means. I just want to be investors. You're even bored. If it's only for a little while. I know exactly what it means. Even if you still hate me." Denzel interrupted. Sylvia's voice was steady. He walked to the window, staring at the rain streaking the sky. "I hate that you denied him. It means he's mine. Denied me, and I can't run from that anymore. Carry the weight alone." For the first time, Johnson glanced at Anthony, who was busy smearing eggs across his expression, heavy with something. "But he deserves more than hate seen in him before. He deserves the truth. Resolve, and if you mean what you say, draft whatever statements you want, but make sure they tell the truth." Swallowing hard. "No more lies." "I will." Across the city, Sylvia's phone following week, he returned again, with calls and messages, this time with diapers and some formula. Were from reporters, things Sylvia usually strangers together offering both support and at first, she ignored them all, focusing "You can't just throw money at us like on the other end of the line." "I'm not throwing money." "You did it, child," he said softly. Rosa said softly. "I asked Rosa what you actually needed." Tall. Sylvia was startled. "It's not about me." The thought of Denzel talking to Rosa, the sharp-tinged elder about Anthony, who had defended her from the beginning. He'll grow up knowing he was never unimaginable. That evening, Sylvia stood at her apartment window, shaking her head with a chuckle, watching the flashing lights down to the pantry, asking about formulas like he was buying stocks. Overwhelming, looked more inside her than a cat in a doghouse. But maybe he's learning. Since this ordeal didn't want to admit it, the weight of doubt things were beginning to matter. Denzel, meanwhile, sat alone in his penthouse with the result envelope to open on the table before him. He listened. He read the line again and again. Probability of paternity, the lullabies 99.99%. He even took a late night. There was no escape, no denial. Spiked a fever. Anthony was his blood with medicine, his son, and sitting memories assaulted him the night of the gala. The loneliness with every step to Sylvia's arms, shadows of doubt. The cruel words Sylvia remembered too clearly, the venom of his denial, the checks he shoved into her hands, the way he had called her a liar. Shame burned in him, but so did something deeper. Could a man who had been so cruel truly change? A longing to rewrite what had been broken another in his own childhood, another way to save give his son something different. One evening, coldness after Anthony had fallen asleep. But did he deserve Sylvia that chance? Confronted him. Could he step into Anthony's life after denying him so publicly? Is this guilt, public image, or do you actually want to be a father? Whiskey. He looked at it down for a long time before answering. He picked up his phone instead. "I don't know how to be a father." Number. "I never had an example worth following, but he couldn't press the dial." He believed fear was the only way to raise a boy. Voice left me ready to face the weight of what he had done for years in the Bronx. I promised myself I'd never be like him. Those who had whispered cry now I realized I already had been cold. Denying, offered awkward apologies. I can't undo what I've done, but I can choose differently now. The raw honesty met their words with polite nods, but for the first time, his voice validation no longer mattered. Only vulnerability. One night as she rocked, "You don't get second chances easily," she said. "The world knows now. I'm not asking the world," he replied. "You have me. I'm asking for the chance to try." Still in her heart. That night, she knew the story wasn't finished. Left. Truth had been revealed. Journal, but justice, she wrote, and healing was still far away. "Your father is trying. I don't know if it will last." Denzel held a press conference, and sometimes showing up as the bravest stepped up to the podium. Meanwhile, suit immaculate, Denzel faced battles beyond Sylvia's walls. His usual confidence threatened to oust him. Investors questioned his leadership. The DNA results have confirmed every move with Anthony. "I am the father accused him of exploiting the child." His voice faltered on the name, but painted Sylvia as opportunistic. For too long, I denied the truth. Once, Denzel didn't fight fear with blind me to my responsibility. He let the storm rage, showing up at Sylvia's door more than words can express. When Johnson called fuming about reputation and empire, crowd, Denzel answered simple questions. "My empire doesn't matter if my son grows up believing he was unwanted. But first, silence on the other end. I must say this. Then Anthony is my son. You've changed, and no matter what it costs me, and not I will not deny him again." But when Denzel's statement was broadcast live, For the first time in decades, he wasn't bending
as
the
she
truth
spooned
to
Anthony
serve power.
mashed peas.
He was
She
bending
froze,
power to
staring
serve
at the
truth.
screen as
At the end of that
Denzel's
week,
filled the
he
room.
stood again in Sylvia's
chest
living room
tightened
as Anthony
anger
toddled
and
into his
relief
arms.
inside her.
The
"Did you
boy
hear that,
laughed,
baby?"
clapping
she
his
whispered
hands.
to Anthony.
The sound pure
He finally
and bright
said it
for
out
a
loud
brief,
to the world.
fleeting moment.
Tears slipped
Denzel
down her
allowed
cheeks.
himself to imagine
It wasn't
a future.
forgiveness,
Not
not
one
yet.
of headlines,
But it
and
was an
stock
acknowledgement.
reports, but
And
of acknowledgement
playgrounds,
was a beginning.
school plays,
That night
and birthdays
the city
marked
buzzed
by
with
presents.
reactions. Not
Some
absence.
praised Denzel for
Sylvia,
taking responsibility.
watching quietly from
Others
the doorway,
condemned him for
saw
years
something
of denial.
new in his face.
Investors panicked.
Not the
but
billionaire,
ordinary people
not the
argued
man
on
of
talk
denial,
shows, radio,
but simply a
and
father.
social media.
Learning,
Everyone had an
stumbling,
opinion, and
but
beginning.
for Sylvia,
She whispered
only one
to
thing
herself,
mattered.
barely audibly.
Anthony.
Truth had been
Maybe.
spoken. In
And
his
though doubt
penthouse,
still lingered,
Denzel sat
hope
alone
fragile,
after the cameras
cautious,
had left.
but
The weight
real
of his
began to
confession,
stir,
pressing
for
down.
in that small Bronx
He had spoken the
apartment,
words
amid
but
chipped
speaking
walls
them
and
was only the
second-hand
first
furniture,
step.
something
The harder
stronger
part
than
lay ahead,
scandal was taking
proving
root.
to Sylvia and
the
to
measure
Anthony
of a father,
that those words
not in wealth
meant
or
something.
power,
But in
for the
choice
first
to
time in
stay.
years, he didn't feel
The
like
second
the
week
master
of
his
Denzel's
destiny.
visits carried with
He
it
felt like
an
a man
uneasy
standing
rhythm.
at the edge
He
of a
arrived in
chasm,
simple clothes,
knowing that crossing it
never
would
with
take more than
assistance or
money,
reporters,
more than
often
power.
carrying groceries
It would take
or toys
humility,
in bags that still looked
sacrifice,
foreign in his
and the
manicured
courage to
hands.
face the pain.
Sylvia
he had
watched
caused.
him carefully
As rain
each
tapped
time.
gently on
She
the
allowed him
windows,
to hold Anthony,
he whispered into
to
the
sit on the
silence,
floor and stack
"I don't know
blocks,
if I can make
to
this
read
right,
from children's
but
books.
I have to try."
He stumbled through with a voice
And in the
unused
Bronx,
to tenderness.
as Sylvia
Yet every
laid
moment
Anthony
he
down to
stayed
sleep,
brought a new
she
tension,
whispered to,
like a fault
"The
line
truth is
deep
yours
beneath
now.
the surface. No one
Shifting,
can take it away,
waiting to reveal
and one
whether
day
it would
you'll know just how
stabilize or
hard I
shatter.
fought for you.
One
evening, Sylvia
storm
found him
had
at the
broken,
small kitchen
but the
table,
path forward,
staring at a
filled with
photograph she
scars
kept
and
tucked into a
possibility,
frame, was only
her
just
mother
beginning.
held her as a child.
The morning after Denzel
He didn't
held
notice
a
her
public
at first.
confession, his
The
face,
Bronx
usually
buzzed
guarded
with
restless
softened
energy,
with something like
Sylvia
grief.
woke to the sound of voices
"That's
outside
your
her
mother?"
window. He asked
Reporters
when he
had
realized
returned
she
in
was
full
there.
force.
Yes, their vans
Sylvia
parked
said
along
cautiously.
the curb. Cameras
"She died
ready to
when I was
capture any
19.
glimpse of her and Anthony. She looks strong." She peered
he
through the
murmured.
blinds and sides.
She was.
Even truth had
Sylvia
its price.
replied.
Inside
Stronger
the
than
kitchen,
most people
the
ever
old
gave her
radio
credit
hummed
for.
with talk show
Denzel
chatter.
nodded.
His
"Did you
eyes
hear
drifting
Smith
back to
last
the photo.
night?"
One host
"I never
said.
had that.
Finally,
My father
admitted the
believed
kid's
in power,
his.
not love.
Took him long enough.
He thought fear would
Another
turn
voice
me into
cut
a
in,
man worth something
sharper,
but
too
all
little,
it did was
too
make me
late.
cold.
He denied
Sylvia
that boy
crossed
for
her
months,
arms.
her tone steady.
Money doesn't buy
Cold is a
forgiveness.
choice.
And you
Sylvia
chose it
stirred
when you
Anthony
denied
oatmeal,
Anthony.
listening
The
with
words hit
tight
hard.
shoulders. He closed
She
his
had
eyes.
wanted the truth
Shoulders
out,
sagging.
yes.
You're
But
right.
she hadn't
I
expected
don't expect
her
you to
private
forget,
life to become
but I want to
public
do better
property.
now. When Anthony babbled happily from his high chair, Sylvia
She
didn't
forced
answer.
a smile.
She
and
turned
set
to
the
stir
bowl
the
in
pot
front
on the
of him.
stove. Don't
The
worry,
smell of
baby.
beans and rice
She
filling the
whispered.
small kitchen.
They can talk
Still,
all they want.
her heart
Well,
beat
stay
faster.
strong.
For all
Across
her
Manhattan,
anger, she
Denzel
couldn't
faced
ignore
his
that
own
his
storm.
voice carried
His
truth,
office was
raw,
chaotic
and
phone
unpracticed.
lines ringing non-stop.
The next day,
investors
the outside
demanding
world
meetings
intruded again.
Journalists demanding
Reporters
quotes.
cornered her
Johnson
as she
stormed
left the
into
diner.
his office.
Sylvia,
Red-faced.
will you let hole
Do
into
you realize
Anthony's
what
life
you've done?
permanently?
Stocks are plummeting.
Is this a custody
Partners
battle
are
in the
threatening
making?
to walk. What
This
do you
could
want
cost
from
you
him
everything.
financially? Denzel
Their
leaned back in
questions
his
stabbed
chair,
like knives.
pale. But Sylvia shielded her face.
Maybe everything
hurrying
needed to
down the
change.
block. When
Johnson
she reached the
slapped the
apartment,
desk.
she slammed
You
the
can't
door
just
shut
throw away your
and leaned
empire
against
for
some
some
maid and a
trembling.
child you never wanted.
Denzel arrived
The
later
words
that
stung,
evening
and
but
saw
Denzel
her distress
didn't flinch.
immediately. He remembered
They followed you
Anthony's
again?
eyes in the clinic. She nodded,
I remembered the way
clutching
the boy
Anthony
looked
tight.
at him without judgment.
This is what
and
you
without
brought into
fear.
our lives. For once, spotlights,
The empire
cameras,
seemed small
strangers
compared to that
shouting
gaze.
at me like I'm guilty of something.
Leave,
he stiffened.
Denzel said quietly.
I never
Johnson
wanted this for
froze.
you, but it's
What?
here. She
Leave.
snapped.
You don't work
And
for
I
me
don't
anymore.
know if I can survive
You'll
it.
regret this.
Johnson
Anthony
fussed in her
Maybe.
arms, sensing
Denzel
her
admitted.
agitation. But I
She
regret a
kissed
lot
his
more
forehead,
already.
trying to calm
By
him.
evening, you
The
walk
news
into this
spread
apartment
further.
like you're learning
Hole
to be
had
a fired
father.
his lawyer. But
Some
outside,
saw it as
the
weakness.
world is tearing
Others
me
as
apart
integrity.
because of you.
But to Sylvia,
her words
it was
landed like
simply
blows.
Denzel
She focused
looked at
instead
Anthony,
on Anthony,
then back at her,
holding him
and his
close
jaw
as Rosa
tightened.
visited with warm
Then I'll
stew
protect
and
you,
warmer
he
words.
said firmly.
He confessed. Sylvia scoffed.
Child, Rosa
You
said,
can't protect me
sitting
from
heavily
whispers.
in the chair.
You can't buy
The
silence.
world heard it from his
Protection
own mouth.
isn't about control,
That matters.
Denzel.
Sylvia
It's
shook her
about
head.
showing up.
It
even
doesn't change
when
the
it's
months
messy.
of denial.
Even when you
It
can't
doesn't
fix
erase
it.
what he said
He looked
about
at her
me.
long and
How
hard.
he called me a liar.
Then nodded
No.
slowly.
Then
Rosa
that's what I'll
agreed.
do.
I'll
It
show
doesn't
up.
erase.
Days
But it
passed
opened
and
a door.
he did.
He
Whether
came
you
in the
walk
mornings
through
to
it is
walk
your
Anthony
choice.
to the clinic with her.
That night,
He came in the
Sylvia
evenings to
opened
help
her
with dinner
journal again,
even if he barely
She
knew
wrote
how to
fiercely.
chop an onion.
Your
He
father
carried
spoke
Anthony
the
through
truth
the crowded
at last.
park.
The world
Ignoring the
knows
stares,
you're his,
his face
but
unreadable,
words are wind,
but his
my
grip
son.
steady.
What matters
Slowly,
is what
neighbors
comes
who
next.
once muttered began
If he
to
thinks
soften,
a speech makes
seeing
him a
that the man
father,
who denied
he's wrong.
was at least
A
beginning
father
to
is proven in
accept.
actions,
Still,
in showing up,
doubts
in
nodded at
sacrifice.
Sylvia. You
One
deserve
night,
nothing less.
after Denzel had left,
Meanwhile,
she sat with
in his
Rosa
penthouse
in the quiet of the
Denzel
kitchen.
sat
Do
with a
people
glass
like
of water.
him ever really
No
change?
whiskey tonight,
she asked.
He stared at the skyline,
Rosa leaned
replaying
back,
his words
folding
at the
her
press
hands.
conference.
Change
He had
is a
spoken
long
the
road,
truth,
child.
but the silence
Some
that
walk
followed
it
was
with
louder
steady
than
steps.
applause.
Some
He
stumble.
thought of Sylvia,
Some
of
never
the fire
get far
in her
at all.
eyes when she
But I've
faced him at
seen
the
men
clinic,
surprise
of the
themselves.
strength she carried
The question
alone.
isn't whether he can
Shame
change.
pressed heavy
It's
on
whether
him.
you'll let him
The
try
next morning,
without letting him break
Denzel
you
did
again.
something no one
Sylvia
expected.
stared into
He
her
drove
tea.
alone to the Bronx.
steam rising
No
like
aides,
smoke from
no
old
security
wounds.
detail, she whispered.
No black SUV convoy.
I don't know if I can trust
Just him in an understated
Trust isn't
car
given,
weaving through streets
Rosa
he had
said
only ever
softly.
passed on his way
It's
to the
built
airport.
brick by brick.
When he stepped out, people recognized him immediately. Whispers turned to shouts. Some hurled insults, others demanded selfies. A few jeered openly. He ignored them all and walked toward Ma's building. Upstairs, Sylvia heard the commotion and looked out the window. Her heart dropped. Denzel, in a tailored suit, darkened by rain, was standing at her door. The knock was firm, hesitant only in the silence that followed. Sylvia opened the door a crack. "What do you want?" "I came to talk," Denzel said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard. Sylvia's jaw tightened. "You've said enough." "Not to you," he replied. "Not to him." He glanced toward Anthony, who peeked curiously from the playpen. For the first time, Denzel's voice broke. "Please," against her better judgment. Sylvia opened the door. He stepped inside, removing his soaked coat. The apartment was small, cluttered, nothing like his glass and marble world. He looked around, humbled. Anthony waddled unsteadily toward him, clutching a toy. Denzel froze as the boy stopped at his feet, staring up at him with storm-gray eyes. The silence stretched until it hurt. Slowly, almost fearfully, Denzel knelt. "Hi," he whispered. His hand trembled as he reached out, then stopped short, afraid. Anthony dropped the toy into his palm and giggled. The sound cracked something in Denzel. He closed his eyes, tears he hadn't felt in years, burning hot. "He doesn't even know who I am," he murmured. Sylvia crossed her arms. "He knows love. That's more than you ever gave him." Denzel looked up at her, shame raw in his eyes. "I was wrong. About everything about you. About him. I can't take back what I did, but I want to try if you'll let me." Sylvia's throat tightened. Part of her wanted to scream, to throw him out, to protect her son from further pain. But another part, the part that saw Anthony Joy in that moment, hesitated. "This isn't about you wanting to feel better," she said firmly. "It's about him. If you come into his life, you stay. No more denial. No more running." Denzel nodded slowly, his voice steady. "Then I'll stay, whatever it costs me." "No." For a long time, the only sound was Anthony's laughter as he clapped his tiny hands. Sylvia watched them both, torn between fury and fragile hope. That night, after Denzel left, she wrote again in her journal. "Your father came today. He looked at you and didn't run. I don't know what comes next, but I know this. You are no longer invisible. The truth has broken through, and now it demands to be lived." And across the city, Denzel returned to his penthouse, soaked and shaken, whispering into the empty room, "I don't deserve him, but I'll try to." For the first time in his life, the billionaire, who had always believed love was weakness, began to understand that perhaps it was the only strength that mattered. The days that followed Denzel Smith's visit to the Bronx were unlike anything Sylvia had experienced. The block buzzed with gossip. Neighbors peeked through curtains, reporters lingered in vans, and curious strangers loitered near the bodega, hoping to catch sight of the billionaire in the worn stairwell of a crumbling apartment building. For Sylvia, it was suffocating. Yet inside her small home, something had shifted. Anthony's laughter was lighter that week, his steps more daring as he toddled from couch to chair. And, though Sylvia still carried skepticism heavy in her chest, she couldn't erase the image of her son giggling as Denzel held out his trembling hand. That simple connection, fragile but undeniable, had cracked through months of anger. On Wednesday morning, there was another knock at the door. Sylvia tensed when she opened it. Denzel stood there, not in a tailored suit this time, but in a plain grey sweater and jeans. No aides, no cameras, just him holding a small paper bag. "I brought breakfast," he said quietly. Sylvia arched her brow. From where? Some five-star chef? He shook his head almost sheepishly. The diner down the block. I asked them what Anthony might like. They suggested scrambled eggs. Sylvia wanted to laugh at the absurdity. A man who could order caviar at midnight now carried a bag of eggs in a paper sack. But instead she stepped aside. Come in. Inside, Anthony's. I want to redeem it. I want to prove to you and to him that I won't run again. She held his gaze, searching for cracks of insincerity. But what she saw unsettled her. A man stripped bare. No arrogance, no armor, only vulnerability. It frightened her almost more than his former cruelty, because vulnerability could be harder to resist. The following week, Denzel faced his board again. Investors were furious, accusing him of tarnishing the company's image, of dragging personal drama into corporate halls. But when they threatened to force his resignation, he stunned them. Do it, he said calmly. If you think this company can't survive my humanity, then take it from me. I won't fight you. The room fell silent. They had expected battle, but not surrender. Some whispered later that his defiance lay not in clinging to power, but in letting it go. When news of the confrontation reached Sylvia through the radio, she sat at the kitchen table, Anthony bouncing on her knee. He's changing, she whispered, half to herself, half to her son. But change doesn't erase the past. Rosa, visiting with her knitting bag, looked up. No, child, it doesn't, but it can write a different future. Don't mistake pride for wisdom. Pride says, hold on to the hurt forever. Wisdom asks, if there's room for healing. Sylvia sighed. And if healing breaks us again, then at least you'll know you didn't let fear decide, Rosa replied, her needles clicking steadily. That night, Denzel returned late, carrying Anthony's favorite blanket he had mistakenly taken with him the day before. Sylvia opened the door reluctantly. You didn't have to drive across town for this. Vet? I did, he said simply, placing it in her hands because I promised I'd show up. She hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered quietly, and they sat in the living room. The silence stretched until Denzel broke it. I fired Johnson. I told the board they could take the company if they wanted. For the first time in my life, I chose something other than money. Sylvia stared. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to know that I'm not here out of convenience or guilt. I'm here because I want to be a father to Anthony. And because he paused, voice trembling, because I see now that denying him was denying myself too. Ma swallowed hard. His words pressed against the walls she had built, shaking them. But she steadied herself. You can't undo the damage. You can't erase what you said. How you humiliated me. He lowered his head. I know, but I can live differently now. I can teach him that love is stronger than fear. Something I never learned until I looked into his eyes. For a long time, neither spoke. Anthony stirred in his crib, murmuring softly as though sensing the tension. Sylvia looked toward him, then back at Denzel. He needs stability, not promises. If you want to stay, you stay through every storm. No more running, no more hiding behind money, just presence. Denzel nodded, his voice is steady. Then that's what I'll give. Presence. The next day, Sylvia noticed something different. Denzel didn't just play with Anthony. He cleaned the dishes, folded the laundry, even fixed the leaky faucet she had long ignored. It wasn't smooth. He cursed under his breath when the wrench slipped, and Anthony laughed at his fumbling. But it was an effort, raw and real. Later, as the three of them sat eating simple pasta at the small kitchen table, Sylvia caught herself smiling. For a moment, the world outside the cameras, the whispers, the lawsuits faded. For a moment, they were just a family. That night, as Denzel prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Sylvia, he said softly, I don't expect forgiveness yet, but I hope one day you'll see me not as the man who denied you, but as the man who chose to stay. She didn't answer. But when the door closed, she held Anthony close and whispered, Your father is trying, and I don't know if it will last, but I see him. Anthony. I see him trying. Across the city, Denzel returned to his penthouse. For years it had been his sanctuary of glass and marble, but now it felt hollow. He poured no drink, turned on no lights. Instead, he sat in the dark, thinking not of boardrooms or headlines, but of a small apartment filled with laughter, tears, and the fragile hope of redemption. For the first time in his life, Denzel Smith no longer feared the shadows. He embraced them because he knew the only way forward was through them. And though the road was uncertain, he had finally chosen to walk it, not alone, not untouchable, but as a man willing to be changed by love. Spring ripened into early summer, and with it the Bronx bloomed in noisy resilience. Children's shouts in the courtyards, vendors hawking mango slices on street corners, music drifting from open windows. Life pressed on, messy and relentless. For Sylvia, the rhythms of her days changed too. The once unimaginable had become routine. Denzel appeared at her door in worn jeans, Anthony shrieking with delight as his father lifted him high. The three of them squeezed around her small kitchen table like it was the center of the universe. Yet beneath the fragile peace, the weight of history lingered. Sylvia never let herself forget the months of denial, the humiliations, the cruel words that once fell from Denzel's mouth. The memory of him in the hospital proclaiming Anthony could never be his lived sharp as glass. Forgiveness wasn't a gift she could hand out easily, but slowly, cautiously, she began to notice something she couldn't deny. Consistency. He came when he said he would. He stayed, even when it was inconvenient. He bent, not with power, but with patience. One humid evening, as fireflies flickered over the cracked sidewalks, Sylvia sat on the stoop with Rosa while Anthony napped inside. "He's changing," Sylvia admitted reluctantly. Rosa chuckled, fanning herself. "I've seen stubborn men move mountains slower than he's moving. But, child, the question ain't whether he's changing. The question is, do you want to let him walk that road beside you?" Sylvia sighed. "I don't know. I'm afraid that if I open the door, I'll lose myself again." "Then don't open it all at once," Rosa advised. "Let him earn his way through brick by brick. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's deciding not to let the past chain your future." Meanwhile, in Manhattan, Denzel faced the crumbling of his empire. The board stripped him of titles. Investors pulled out. Partners cut ties. Once hailed as invincible, he was now portrayed in headlines as a cautionary tale. But strangely, Denzel didn't fight. He let go. One night, standing in his penthouse with boxes half packed, he looked out over the skyline and whispered, "This was never home." His thoughts weren't on stock reports or losses. They were Anthony Giggles, Sylvia's weary eyes, the feel of a cramped kitchen where for the first time he had tasted something like peace. The next morning, Denzel arrived at Sylvia's apartment with no suit, no entourage, only a cardboard box in his arms. Inside were children's books, Anthony blanket, and a framed photo of his late mother. Sylvia looked at him bewildered. "What are you doing with all that?" she asked. "I'm leaving the penthouse," he said simply. "It doesn't mean anything to me anymore." He glanced around the small apartment, the worn furniture, the sound of Anthony babbling from the bedroom. "This is what matters." Sylvia's breath caught. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity. A billionaire discarding marble floors for peeling paint. But another part, the part that had fought alone for so long, recognized the truth in his voice. "You can't just step into our lives and erase the past," she warned. "I'm not trying to erase it," he said. "I'm trying to build something new, if you'll let me." That evening, Denzel helped her cook dinner, burning the rice, but laughing when Anthony smeared peas across his shirt. Sylvia caught herself smiling too, against her will. For a fleeting moment, the weight lifted, and it felt like family. Still, the outside world pressed in. Paparazzi snapped photos of them leaving church together. Tabloids speculated about marriage. Talk shows debated whether Denzel's transformation was real. Sylvia ignored most of it, but one article struck her. Hull redeems himself through fatherhood. She slammed the paper shut. "He doesn't get redemption just because he showed up for a few weeks," she muttered. That night, after Anthony was asleep, she confronted him. "You know, the world thinks this makes you a hero now, that by showing up, you've redeemed yourself. But I don't see a hero. I see a man trying to repair what he broke." Denzel didn't argue. He looked at her steadily. "Then keep seeing that because that's what I am." His humility disarmed her. She wanted anger, wanted to hurl the weight of her pain back at him, but instead, she found herself staring at him in silence. Her heart was beating faster. Days passed into weeks. One Saturday, Denzel suggested they take Anthony to Central Park. Sylvia hesitated, but agreed. Under the wide summer sky, Anthony toddled through the grass, squealing as pigeons scattered around him. Denzel chased him awkwardly, catching him before he toppled. When Anthony threw himself against his father's chest, laughing, Sylvia felt something in her crack. Watching them together, she realized this was what she had always wanted for her son. Not wealth, not headlines, but love that stayed. That night, after Denzel left, she opened her journal. Her hand trembled as she wrote, "Your father is not perfect, he never will be. But today, he ran through grass with you until you laughed so hard you fell over. Today, he was simply present. And maybe that is the redemption we both need. Not grand gestures, not headlines, just presents." Meanwhile, Denzel sat alone in a rented apartment downtown, smaller than anything he had lived in since his youth. He looked at the cardboard boxes stacked against the wall at the single photograph of Anthony he kept on the nightstand, and whispered, "I don't deserve him, but I will fight to be worthy." Weeks later, Sylvia and Denzel found themselves together on the stoop again. Anthony is asleep inside. The night was thick with summer air, the city humming around them, silent, stretched, comfortable this time. Finally, Denzel spoke. "I lost everything I thought mattered," he said. "But I gained something I never thought I deserved. A son, and maybe a chance to make things right with you." Sylvia turned to him, her eyes steady. "You'll never erase the pain, but if you keep choosing him day after day, maybe one day I'll believe you've changed." He nodded, his voice quiet. "Then that's what I'll do. I'll choose him. Every day." The street light flickered above them, casting a halo of gold on the cracked pavement. For the first time, Sylvia let herself breathe without the weight of anger pressing down. The future was uncertain, scarred, but it was also open. Inside, Anthony stirred in his crib, his storm-grey eyes fluttering open for a moment before closing again. Outside, his parents sat side by side. Two people bound, not by perfection, but by the fragile, stubborn hope that love, slow, stumbling, imperfect, could still rewrite the ending. And so the story came full circle. A child once denied, now claimed. A mother once humiliated, now unbroken. A man once powerful, now humbled. The past remained carved into them, but the future stretched ahead, fragile as glass, bright as dawn. Sylvia whispered into the night so softly that only the summer air carried it. "We are not invisible anymore." And, for the first time, Denzel Holt believed her. The lesson of this story is clear and timeless. Truth cannot be silenced, and love cannot be denied. Wealth, power, and pride may build walls, but those walls eventually crumble in the face of honesty and responsibility. Sylvia's strength shows that dignity is not measured by status, but by the courage to stand firm, even when the world mocks you. Denzel's journey proves that redemption is never instant, but begins the moment a person chooses humility over ego and presence over excuses. And through Anthony, the innocent child caught in the storm, we are reminded that every life deserves recognition, protection, and love. The story teaches us that while the past cannot be erased, the future can be rewritten when we choose compassion, accountability, and the quiet bravery of showing up the day after hay. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done?